Rishi Sunak is facing growing unrest from Tory backbench MPs and his cabinet over imposing the biggest tax rise since the 1970s. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, the PM's current plan will drag many middle earners, including teachers, nurses and electricians, into the 40p rate of income tax. And top Tories, still sore from the party's poor show at the local elections, are now calling on Sunak to bring tax cuts forward to avoid a hammering at the general election. But it seems that the PM and his Chancellor High Tax Jeremy Hunt are hell-bent on stopping the UK becoming a low-tax nation, an aim that saw Rishi's predecessor Liz Truss destroyed by the globalist MSM and civil service blob. And Tory MP Simon Clarke, former Chief Secretary to the Treasury and close ally of Truss, says the PM needs to ditch the current high-tax socialist consensus and rediscover what the party truly stands for. I'm delighted to say Simon Clarke joins me live in the studio now.
Good evening.
So you say, Simon, the Tories have lost Thatcherite principles when it comes to taxation.
I think that's right, and I think we've got obviously a very challenging economic landscape at the moment. We all know the effects of first the pandemic and now the inflation caused by war in Europe, and I respect the fact that that creates a difficult situation for the government, as it would for, frankly, any government. But there are choices in front of us in terms of both spending and tax, which I think we are getting wrong. And I think it's very important that over the course of the year leading up to the election and in our manifesto, that we set out a plan to break free of what feels like an ever-increasing ratchet of more spending.
Because when Thatcher was in power, it was a tiny percentage of folk who were in this top
3.5%
bracket. So it's gone from 3.5% to 1 in 5. And I mean, that's not going to get the people out to vote Tory at the next election, is it?
Well, exactly. I mean, I think it's obviously bad for the economy, it's bad for family finances, but it's really bad for the Conservative Party because it's starving us of our unique selling point to the public, which is ultimately we are the party who will leave you with more money in your pocket.
Do you in some ways sympathise with Sunak, though, because he's seen what happened to your ally? You know, you were in her cabinet, Liz Truss. I supported her throughout the leadership campaign last year. I think she could have been a brilliant Prime Minister. And actually, Kwasi Kwarteng could have been a brilliant Chancellor too. Sure, they went too fast. Sure, they didn't communicate in the right way. But don't you agree that their job was made almost impossible by the forces working against them, who were almost insistent that the UK has to stay with the status quo when it comes to taxation?
Well, I think there were lots of factors which led to what happened last autumn, some of which clearly amounted to mistakes, but some of which did amount, I think, to a systemic aversion to the break with the economic model that Liz was trying to deliver. And there is no point crying over spilt milk. What happened, happened. But do I think that the fundamental arguments that Liz was advancing remain valid? Yes, I do. I think that the burden of tax and regulation in our economy is too high. I think that we've got a state which doesn't know its limits. And I think that UK competitiveness, which is obviously the cornerstone of our ability to be a major player globally, is declining. And we need to take steps to address that. None of it's impossible. It's within our power to do it. And fundamentally, I think that over the course of the next year, we do need to be braver.
Your former party treasurer, Lord Cruddas, used to be a major donor, told me at the Conservative Democratic Organisation conference at the weekend that he fears the Conservatives are now a centre-left party. Do you share any of his concerns?
I think centre-left is strong. I mean, I do think that we should have the courage of our convictions. And whilst I absolutely respect the fact that the government is trying to deliver sound money and to make sure that we can pay our way, I think that the balance has tipped over into an economic programme which is way to the left of that which I think a Conservative government ought optimally to be seeking to set out.
Speaking of the CDO, it was fascinating speaking to the grassroots Tories there who have not given up hope of Boris Johnson returning to the Prime Ministership. Is there any world in which you can see that happening, Simon Clarke?
I mean, the most important thing to say is obviously that, the Prime Minister is in place and, we all as Conservative MPs have a responsibility, I think, to try to get behind the government and to make sure that we succeed in 2024. I mean, we obviously will have different views as to how we can best do that, but fundamentally, we do owe loyalty to the Prime Minister. My thoughts on what happened last year are very clear. I supported Boris Johnson to the bitter end, and I wanted him to come back when Liz fell. So you can, I think, take it as read that I remain a huge admirer of the former Prime Minister. I think that his electoral reach, his generosity of vision, the fact that he genuinely did get those big decisions right. I mean, that was the government line last summer, but it was true on overcoming COVID, on facing down Putin and arming the Ukrainians, critically, obviously, on making sure that we actually delivered the Brexit that people voted for. Boris Johnson was far more in tune than any other contemporary politician with what people wanted.
So if the Tories look like they are facing a thumping at the next general election, could it be possible that Boris is drafted in?
Well, I can't be drawn on that question. I mean, look, the reality is that, as I say, we have a duty to try and make sure that we succeed as a government. And Rishi Sunak is a very, very capable Prime Minister. There are lots of things that I wish we were doing somewhat differently. There are lots of things, obviously, that I do welcome. I do think, for example, the illegal migration bill is a really positive step forward.
Although legal migration
is just too high.
At 1 million.
Yeah, well, if it comes through at 1 million or even close to that, that is a sure sign that what the Home Secretary has been saying needs to be respected. I mean, I'm only going off what I'm reading in the newspapers now, but if there is serious resistance in Cabinet to plans to bring immigration down from the kind of levels that we're talking about, then I think that's crazy, because at every election over the last 14 years, the British public have made it clear that they want lower immigration to this country, and we have to take steps to actually make that happen. We have to stop, fundamentally, the substitution of cheap foreign labour to displace wage rises in the UK, which is what so many people voted for in 2016.
Couldn't agree more. Funny, I just wanted to ask you about this bizarre row that has developed between the bitter lefty Carol Vorderman, Lisa Nandy on the Labour front bench, and the Tory Teesside Mayor Ben Houchen, who to me seems to be a very high-performing guy, and it's all over his commitment to level up the country. But he's been accused of crony, is he?
Well, there's been a lot of nonsense talked about what's happening at Teesworks. Teesworks is the big regeneration project at Redcar, just north of my constituency. And what you're seeing at Teesworks is a sustained smear attempt by the Labour MP for Middlesbrough, Andy MacDonald, and other local Labour figures to try and basically throw as much mud as possible at Ben Houchen and this crucial regeneration project, in the hope that it sticks, that it drags the project down, and that by doing so, obviously, it contaminates the Tory brand. It is genuinely one of the most cynical and shameful attempts I've seen in politics for years. And the harm it will do to Teesside jobs, if it's allowed to succeed, is enormous. So we're using every opportunity we've got to set out the truth, that there is no corruption, that no laws have been broken. And Ben this evening has said that if the National Audit Office want to conduct a full investigation, he's happy with that, because ultimately, in the end, there's nothing to hide.
Big fan of Ben Houchen.
Indeed,
actually,
as am I.
He's the sort of Tory, actually, you're going to need out in force at the next election.
Quite.
Simon Clarke, former Cabinet Minister, really great to have you here
Dan.
tonight. Thank you so much.